Welcome. This is the Know Your Numbers podcast. This is your host, Chris McCormick. I have a very special guest with me today in the name of Matt Picheny. Matt comes from the Brooklyn, New York area, but invests in apartment syndicates and multifamily commercial real estate around the world. Matt, welcome to the show. I'm sure you can do yourself a much better introduction than I could ever give. So introduce us a little bit and give us an idea of what it is you do.
Sure, Chris. Thanks for the introduction. I appreciate it. Well, let me start off by saying this. Do you remember 2001 and where you were in 2001?
I've heard stories. I don't physically remember.
So for me, I lived in New York, and I had my own little boutique agency working on digital products, right? We were doing websites and things of that nature. Well, 2001 is when the dot-com bubble burst, right? And for me, what happened to all my clients were going out of business. My business was imploding. The ones that weren't going out of business weren't spending any money on any digital projects at all. And I was faced with a very uncertain time for myself financially when it came to business aspects of things. And then I go home and my landlord tells me I've got 90 days to get out of my apartment. For me, trying to find a place in New York at that time with a business that was imploding, I mean, this was like mission impossible, like climbing Mount Everest or something. Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make this happen? What ended up happening was I got a job in-house at a client of mine, Showtime, the cable television channel, offered me a position in-house. So I went in there and I was looking to rent an apartment, and my sister actually found a note on a bulletin board, and someone was selling a co-op apartment. And it was in not the part of town that I wanted to live in. It was about 30 minutes further north, but it looked like a good opportunity. And after looking into it, I could save some money by doing that. And I was actually buying something. 2.5 years later, I sold that place and saw my initial investment in that apartment more than quadruple.
Wow.
And I said, wow, just like you say, I was like, wow, how do I do that again? And so that's what set me on the path of wanting to invest in real estate. I mean, I saw the power of real estate. Now, I then continued with my job and was working. From Showtime, I went on to work sort of in the corporate advertising world in New York City over a period of almost 18 years, including the time in my boutique agency. But during the last 10 years that I was doing that, I started doing real estate as a hobby. It was something I was very interested in. And 6 years ago, my wife got an amazing job opportunity that was too good for her to sort of pass up. It was a wonderful career opportunity for her, but it would have us moving from New York down to Miami, Florida, which has very nice weather. But for me, I didn't know what my prospects were from a job perspective. And it turned out they weren't the same type of positions that they had in New York. In New York, I was working on much bigger projects, bigger agencies, and in Miami, it was much smaller. But I was burned out from doing that advertising world for 18 years. And so I then transitioned into doing my hobby, real estate, full time. So that was 6 years ago. And I haven't looked back. I've been moving forward with a career as a full-time real estate investor. I also syndicate deals, and I'm also an author of a new book that just came out, and my wife and I have won a couple of Tony Awards. So it's been a pretty good 6 years.
Yeah, that's incredible, man. And I knew there was more to the story than I was giving off. So thank you for making that all clear to us. I would love to start with your personal investment strategy. It sounds like some expensive markets that you've found yourself in, from New York to Miami. I know you've spent some time in Boston. For those of us that do live in these higher income, higher cost areas of living, what strategies do you use that help with that? Do you invest out of state? Do you invest in your market? Or is there anything you can provide to somebody that's looking to make their jump but sees that cost as a barrier to entry?
There's a saying that I've heard people say, live where you want to live and invest where the numbers make sense.
Okay.
in New York and Miami and Boston,
Yep.
as you mentioned, those places are very expensive markets to purchase real estate in. I think that they can be, especially when it comes to New York and Boston in particular, they can be very wise investments. But I think that those are the type of investments that are really about preservation of capital. So if you
Yep.
have a lot of money, you want to park it in real estate, and you think, over time you want to, leave the money in there. I think I can't think of a better market. I mean, look, I love New York, and I live
Yeah.
in New York. I used to live in New York, but I think Boston might even be stronger just because of the diversity they have of different employment, and it's a wonderful market, I think, to own real estate in.
Yeah.
But you're not necessarily going to grow wealth, I don't think.
Okay.
So that I don't have any properties in Boston.
Right.
I don't own anything in Miami, and the only thing I own in New York is the place that I live in, which happened to have been a wonderful investment. If I could find another investment like this, I would do it in a heartbeat. But there's a whole number of circumstances why this was a great investment. But 99.9% of my investments are out of state. They're primarily in the South and in the Midwest.
Okay.
So I tend to invest in real estate. I like it because it's a tangible asset. It's a real asset. It's not just ones and zeros. And also because investing in those areas, sort of in the middle of America, you don't get the big ups, and there's still ups and downs. Real estate and all markets are cyclical, but not the sort of big ups and downs that you might get on the coast. And I can find properties, and this is the most important thing when it comes to my strategy in investing in real estate, on properties that are providing me with strong cash flow.
Yep.
So I want to know that when I'm holding on to that property, that it will be generating income for me. In my book, I talk about these different keystone concepts, and keystone concept number 5 is cash flow is king. It's all about that cash flow, because like I said before, the markets are cyclical. They're going to go up, they're going to go down. But as long as you have money coming in the door, you can pay your mortgage, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
you hopefully have some income and some profits from that.
Right.
And usually, and I don't need to tell you this, Chris, because you're an awesome CPA, there's those wonderful tax advantages, right? For real estate with depreciation and everything. I mean, you're the expert on that kind of stuff, but it is really tax advantaged.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think that segues well to a big topic of mine that I want to talk about, is this book that you had written, and what it took and what it's like being an author. Because I mean, for me and for many people out there, it's a dream to have their name on a cover of a book, and to be able to send that out and just say that, yeah, I took the time to write a book. So Matt, if you could just explain what that was like, one, to take the step to actually start writing the book, and then the actual overall process, because it sounds great, but I know there's struggles that come along with it. So I'd love to hear what that experience was like, and maybe it was all great. So enlighten us.
A little while ago, I looked on meetup.com. I wanted to see how many users they have. It was something like 84 million people a year do a meetup or something. It was some huge number, and I was like blown away. And I used to be one of those, right? I had this meetup that I ran in Boston, and we would have tons of people come. We built it up over time. It took several years, but we got to a point where we were having on average at least 100 people at these meetups. And the meetups were about real estate and passive investing. And I would have people come up to me after the meetup and say, hey, listen, I'm interested in investing in this deal. Will you look at it for me? And I look at deals with people, and I never tell them to do a deal or not do a deal, but point out something. Hey, you might want to look at this thing. Why did they underwrite this? That seems a little strange. You might want to ask the sponsor about this thing or that thing. And it became too much.
Yeah.
I started getting too many people asking me questions, and I decided to write it down. So what I did was I put together a document that talked about how to look at these deals and the different metrics to look at. And when all was said and done, I had like a 70 to 80 page book that was probably the most boring thing you could possibly read in your entire life. I'm sure it would put people to sleep about 4 or 5 pages in. I mean, it was just, it had really good information, but it was really dense and thick and just not really easy to read.
Yep.
What I ended up doing was taking that information, but spreading it out over, it's like 270 pages of content. And what I did was I took the stories of my life. I have a really interesting background. We didn't really, I didn't touch on earlier, but I used to be an actor, a professional actor before I started doing the advertising and all that. And so I have some interesting stories, and I've learned things and maybe in non-traditional paths. It's not like I went to college and studied real estate, went right into it. So I took all of these things that I've learned along the way and told them the way that I learned them throughout my life, and created this book, which has 18 different keystone concepts that I teach throughout the book as I learned them. I just tell you, hey, we're doing this thing and I learned this. So here's the thing that I learned. And also have over 60 different real estate terms that are defined in the book. So it's a good, I think, educational book, but there's a narrative there. There's a story there that makes it easy and fun and interesting to read. And it's also starts, really basic for people who've never done any real estate, talking about what's an asset and what's a liability. And by the end of the book, we're talking about doing air rights deals and 1031 exchanges. So for people who are more experienced, it just sort of runs the gamut. That took me about, the first draft of the book took about 3 weeks. I dictated it in my backyard. This was the boring version, right? I dictated it in my backyard on my phone, to Siri. And then Siri, tried to turn it into Word doc. That took probably another 2 to 3 weeks to go in and fix everything, because the speech recognition isn't perfect, and neither is my diction. So, but I had that really boring book. It took me about another 9 months to go through and actually write that story. I actually hired a writing coach that I know to help me, because I'm not a writer. So I would write a draft of a chapter and send it over to her. And she'd be like, that's, we don't need that. This is really interesting. How did this make you feel? What were you thinking at this point? In a Word doc, like the comments, right? And that really helped me just kind of know where to sort of expand and tell more of a story, and what parts are kind of boring. And it's just helpful to have that sort of sounding board, I think, to go off of. And working through that was great. Like I said, it took about 9 months, and then I finished that up at the end of 2020. Going into 2021, I think my final draft was ready like the first week of January, and it took another year for the book to actually come out, right? Because here we are, we're talking now in January of 2022. Pre-order, full release is February 9th, and this past year, it probably shouldn't have taken a year. I had a lot of things going on this year. My father passed away. He was very sick, and then he passed away. And we then moved, not because of that, but just my wife got another awesome job because she's just really good at her work. We moved from Boston back to New York.
Okay.
Got the kids in school, and then we had the holidays. So there was just a lot of things going on, because if all those things hadn't happened, the book probably would have come out towards the end of the summer. But I think it usually takes people about 1 to 2 years to really write the book, because after the book's written, there's a lot of work that goes on. There's a lot of editing that happens. You go through line edits, copy edits, proofreading. You have to come up with the cover for the book and the design. And then the hardest part was the interior design of the book. Because of my background working in digital marketing and having designed websites and things like that, I'm like really particular about things. I wouldn't say that I'm OCD, because I don't think that I am, but I'm just, I want everything to look really good and really clean. And so I wanted everything to be spaced perfectly with some nice graphics. I'm really proud of the way the book interior looks. But that took a lot of work, because there's a lot of images in there too. So then if you change one thing, it shifts everything. And it was a long process. And then once it's done, you want to put it into a pre-order phase for, at least a month or two, just to sort of get it out there, make sure it's populated on all the different websites. I mean, Amazon, I'm sure, is where most of the book sales will come from, but you want it everywhere, Barnes and Noble and Apple, and just everywhere. So to just get it out there, get the word out, you want it to be in pre-order for I'd say a minimum 4 weeks. So it's a lengthy process, and there's a lot through the whole thing.
I'm sure. That's awesome, man. And the first thing that I noticed was the cover, and it does pop, and I can tell that there's an artistic background to it. So I do just want to honor you for that. And I like the tie into your acting career too, because I mean, when I first looked at it, I had heard about your acting career, but now that we're actually talking about it, I see it over on your right hand shoulder. It's like, it's the curtain. You're pulling back the curtain, and it's the backstage to real estate investing. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey and how your career and your experience in acting on Broadway has shaped what this life of Matt Picheny's been for however long, and how it got you into the real estate and how it shaped your real estate journey.
Sure. I moved to New York in 1992 to pursue a career in theater, and I went to a musical theater conservatory. When I graduated from there, 3 days later, I was off on my first tour, because during your last semester at that school, they encourage you to audition, and I booked a gig. I then, for the next 5 years, was in 15 different professional productions all across the United States. Had a blast, had the time of my life. It was wonderful. There was a number of things that I learned about life through working as an actor, and sort of two things that stick out in my mind are persistence. That's something that's been really important from a real estate perspective. And I share a couple of stories about persistence in the book, but I'll tell you, my first professional acting gig, the one that I did that I left on 3 days after graduation, I had gone in for the audition. I did well at the audition, and I got a call back. And so I use that when I'm doing real estate. So I always want to get into, a lot of times there'll be a broker will put out an opportunity, and you'll make an offer, and then they'll have another round, and it's usually a best and final round, where that to me is like the callback. As long as I can get into the best and final round, I almost don't care what happens. I still want to get the deal, right? But there's a number of factors that are beyond my control. Let's say I'm looking to buy a $10 million property. I don't have $10 million. I'm going to put together, through my group of investors, so I syndicate deals. So what I do is I put in my own money, but I get other investors together. We put our money together to buy these properties. So this way, someone with $50,000 could be involved in a $10 million property. But if we're up against someone who's got $10 million all cash, like, I can't compete. There's no way I can compete. It's just not going to happen. So the same thing with the acting. There were some things that are beyond my control. Let's say they're casting the son for Ross, was especially back then. I looked very young, and let's say the mom and the dad both have blonde hair. Well, I have dark hair, so I might not look like their son, so I might not get cast in the show, right? So all I really cared about was the callback. Now, for this particular show that I'm talking about, that I had auditioned for, I got the callback. I went to the callback, and I did really, really well, but I didn't get the show. What ended up happening was I sent out a postcard. So I used to do this. I used to send out postcards with like my photo on it and a thank you note. Thank you for the audition, and it's such a wonderful time, yada, yada, yada. Well, it just so happened that the day that the postcard arrived at the director's house, the person that they had offered the job to ended up saying, you know what, I have another opportunity. I don't know what the circumstances were, but they ended up declining the opportunity. So they needed to go back to the drawing board, and they had, there was a few of us still left for the role. And I think we were all good. And it just so happened my postcard arrived that day, and they were like, wow, this kid really wants it. So, and he was I was still very good, but it was that persistence. And I have other stories that even get more into persistence. This was kind of an easy persistence one, but that's how I ended up getting that first acting gig. And so the same thing is true with real estate. So, one time I was in Best and Final, and this was with a broker that I had put in multiple offers with and made it to Best and Final several times. And they awarded the job to somebody else, which is fine. I kept in contact with the broker, and something happened, and the deal fell out. And they ended up pulling me in, and I was able to have good terms and a good offer, and I ended up getting that property. So, that persistence is really important. And also, not, this is why I said it's two things. It's kind of still the same one, but just not letting that get you down, because in real estate, you have to look at deal after deal after deal. A lot of the deals don't even work. Then you find deals where the numbers make sense, and you send out an offer and you don't get it, right? And the same thing with auditioning. I would go after audition after audition after audition and not get shows, but I wouldn't let that get me down, and just keep getting back up and going after it again and again.
Wow, that's awesome, man. And persistence is huge, but there's something that I don't think you're mentioning in that story, and it's the power of relationship and being intentional with your relationships. Because you're persistent. Like, you can be persistent and not give up, but go after different opportunities. But it's another thing to be intentional about the relationships that you already have, and I see that in those stories, and I'm sure it's present throughout your life with your wife, your kids, and everything else that you got going on. I'd love to hear a little bit about the importance of relationships, business, family, you name it, man. I think that's something that everybody can learn from.
I agree 100%. 3 of the keystone concepts I have are all around relationships and networking and things of that nature. So it's all about relationships. And I think that's true in real estate. And just as you said, in life, right? In relationships with your family, with your friends, within your community. And I mean, that it's the key to everything, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. And so how many keystone concepts are in your book? Is it 5 or are there
18?
18, okay. Awesome.
18 keystone concepts.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It's about there's 11 chapters in the book. It's usually about 1 to 2 per chapter.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. So now that you have your book, you have a great real estate business, and I can tell you're doing what you love. What is on the horizon for this year in Matt's life, and how can we help you with it? Because I'd love to do anything I can to support you.
Oh, that's super kind of you. I mean, I think getting the word out about the book is really, I'm trying to, I'm not going to make a lot of money off this book, right? I'm probably going to lose money on the book, which is fine. It's not what it's for. I want to get information out there. So beyond the book, I'm putting out a bunch of content on social media. I've started a YouTube channel, and I have a blog. I'm just trying to get out information about passive investing. It's been something that really has changed my life over the past 6 years and has set me on the course to financial freedom. And I'd like to help others do that. And the reason why is I think that once people, so keystone concept number 1 is don't trade your time for money.
Wow. Yep.
People, they always say time is money, but time's actually way more valuable than money. Yeah. You can always make money. You can't make time.
Right.
So if I can find ways to help people to stop trading their time for money, and that doesn't mean necessarily leaving their job, but maybe reducing their hours, giving them some more flexibility, time to spend with their families and do things in their communities that are going to be beneficial and help make the world a little bit of a better place. I have a win-win sort of attitude that I approach everything with. When we're investing in apartments, we're looking to improve lives for the residents of the property, as well as us, the investors. It's not a charity. We're here to money, and we make good money, but you can do well by doing good. Right. And I think you can be an ethical business owner and improve the quality of life for people and still make a generous profit. And that's what I'm into doing. And I think that the more people have time freedom, they're going to be valued, not that they aren't already, but they'll have more freedom to, number one, be relaxed, and number
Yep.
two, they can do things that propel society forward, and
Mhm.
and that means different things to different people. You know, I have a friend who's doing a whole bunch of stuff with is a an investor, real estate investor, and he's doing a bunch of work with animals, right?
Mhm.
For me, it's about improving these communities. I try to do stuff locally, but also I really like the theater. You know,
Yep.
that's been my background. That's what my wife does for her 9 to 5, and so we're investing and trying to create new pieces of theater, because I think theater can be a wonderful outlet for people and can bring certain social issues to light and give
Yeah.
people perspective on different topics. And so this is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So for all of those reasons, I think it's a really good thing. And that's something
Yep.
that I'm passionate about. So like I said, my friend's passionate about animals. Chris, I don't know what are you passionate about?
I like people. I like building relationships. I like having conversations and bringing value.
So you can probably come up with something around that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, as if people have less time that they need to do to be able to sort of pay their bills and
Mm.
feed themselves and take care of their family, they could maybe use their time for other things that are productive and help move society forward.
Yep.
So that's kind of the impetus behind this whole
Hey,
thing.
that's awesome, Matt. And I think you hit it right on the head there, in the fact that you can bring value to the marketplace in a wide variety and a wide range of ways, and it doesn't have to be evil per se. And that's something that I like to share on this podcast. So I thank you for that. And it's the fact that making money and having a business and being an entrepreneur and investing your money wisely does not have to be frowned upon, and honestly should be glorified in a way, because it gives you that freedom of time. It gives you that ability to serve others, to give back, to provide for more than just yourself. So I thank you for bringing that to the light and nailing that into the ground. And honestly, I honor you for doing that in your community. And it's great to see that being done, especially in a place like New York, where I'm familiar, and I think they could use more of it. So keep doing what you're doing. And before I get to the last question, I'd like to give you some time to offer any last minute pieces of advice, either in the real estate world, authorship. Maybe somebody out there is on Broadway looking to do something with their life, either on the stage or outside the stage. Any last minute advice from Matt for the audience?
I mean, when it comes to the theater, it's a very difficult business, right?
Yeah.
It's a really hard business. It was something that people always told me when I was younger and wanting to pursue a career in theater. They're like, don't do that. You'll never make any money. I didn't listen to that
Mm-hmm.
because it was something that I was passionate about. And then I ended up finding another thing that I was passionate about that didn't exist back then, which was, because this was, 1996, 97 that I got involved in the internet and in designing websites and things of that nature, which allowed me to exercise the sort of analytical side of my brain. It was another thing that I fell in love with. But I guess it's really about following your passion.
Mm-hmm.
Because then again, I followed my passion to go into real estate.
Yep.
Follow your passions, and the relationships, like you were saying, are key.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And I will add my piece to that would be, don't be afraid to change, because I mean, most people, and I myself would think that real estate is a far distance away from Broadway, and to hear about the different turns that you've taken along the way is encouraging, and it's great to hear and great to see. So thank you, Matt, for your time. We do like to close the show with one final question. Being it a personal finance, money, investing show, we ask all of our guests, and Matt, you are our guest today. What is one truth about money that most people regard as myth?
One truth about money
Mm-hmm.
that most people regard as a myth. I think you've stumped me with a really good question. I think that a lot of people think that money will solve everything.
Yep.
And I don't know if it does, because I don't have all the money in the world, but I've been told that it doesn't.
Yeah.
I have found that as I've made money, it has made my lifestyle a little more relaxed in terms of like, I'm not worried. I used to, when I was younger and I was waiting tables, right? I was like, oh my gosh, am I gonna be able to like pay the rent this month? I'm not in that position anymore, which is very fortunate. But there's many other aspects to life that are equally important, not just making money. And so there are so many other things that I think go beyond just the dollar. So money doesn't solve everything. But I mean, it's nice to have, but it doesn't solve everything.
Right. Wow, that's so good, man. And I think that's what everybody needs to hear. And I'm sure that will hit most people. So Matt, I thank you for your time. To the listeners out there, go ahead and buy Matt's book, Backstage Guide to Real Estate. Produce passive income, write your own story, and direct your dollars towards positive change. Matt, it's been a real pleasure. I look forward to what's next for you, and look forward to continuing the relationship and having more conversations just like this.
Thanks, Chris. It was a real pleasure.
My pleasure.